Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out today for the lecture with Professor Uzi Leibner of Hebrew University. His lecture will go for about 45 minutes, and then we're hoping for 15 minutes of question and answer after, if you have some questions. And there's going to be a microphone at the back there where we can line up for questions for Professor Leibner once he's done. Our history with archaeology in Jerusalem goes back to the days just after the Six-Day War, when East Jerusalem, ancient Jerusalem, was opened up for Israeli-led excavation. Back then, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, who headed Ambassador College, he partnered with Hebrew University and Professor Benjamin Mazar, and they led together these massive excavations at the southern wall of the Temple Mount for a decade. And then following that, in the 1980s, Ambassador College, again led by Mr. Armstrong, worked with Professor Yigal Shiloh with the huge excavations in the city of David, a little bit further to the south. And then following that time, 2006 and onwards, all the way through till 2021, at her death, Dr. Eilat Mazar, another Hebrew University archaeologist, the college, Armstrong College here, excavated with her in the city of David and the Ophel, both areas that were previously excavated with Hebrew University, with Benjamin Mazar and Yigal Shiloh. Following her untimely death in 2021, Armstrong College has partnered again with Hebrew University, and now specifically with Professor Uzi Leibner, who we'll be hearing from today, with the renewed excavations at the Ophel area, and we've been sending students over there for the past 3 years to dig alongside him. Professor Leibner was born in New York, but he grew up in Jerusalem. He completed his archaeological studies at Bar-Ilan University, which is just outside Tel Aviv, where he obtained his PhD. He spent a year, 2005 and 6, at the University of Michigan. I know we have a Michigander here, or one or two. And then in 2007, he came to Hebrew University. He was on the faculty there from 2008, and then he became a full associate professor there since 2018. Dr. Eilat Mazar, who he worked with previously, her expertise was in the Iron Age, and Professor Leibner's expertise is in the Hellenistic and Roman and Byzantine periods. And he has, before he came to Jerusalem, excavated mainly and studied mainly the Galilee region in the north of Israel. So in 2022, we asked him if he would be willing to move his base of intellectual operations from the north in the Galilee to just south of the southern wall of the Temple Mount. We took him to the site that we excavated with Eilat Mazar, showed him some of the amazing preservation going back 2,000 years, and then almost immediately or shortly thereafter in 2022, we started our first excavation with him. We send students from here in Edmond, Oklahoma, Armstrong College, as well as the sister campus in Edstone, England, to excavate every summer with Professor Leibner. We also have the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, staff members based in Jerusalem that work alongside Professor Leibner as part of his staff. Our students have grown to appreciate Professor Leibner's fatherly kindness on the dig, as well as his intellectual generosity. He's very willing to share his knowledge and love for archaeology with our students on the dig. And today, for us here in Oklahoma, and for others watching online, wherever you are, he's going to share some of that knowledge today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Uzi Leibner of Hebrew University.
So I would like to thank Brent for this flattering introduction, and thank you all for being here today. Before beginning, I would like to thank Mr. Flory, as well as Brad McDonald and Brent Negtegal, for inviting me to your beautiful campus to give this presentation. The collaboration between the Hebrew University and first Ambassador College and then the Armstrong College goes back for nearly 60 years and proved to be extremely fruitful for the exploration of ancient Jerusalem. The conclusions that I'm presenting here are based on the accumulating information gained from years of hard work by numerous people, including dozens of Armstrong College students. We at the Hebrew University are grateful for this collaboration and for each and every student who comes to work with us, and we hope to see many of you joining us or coming back in the next seasons. Pilgrimage to the Jerusalem Temple was a major component of Second Temple period Judaism. This ritual derives from the biblical commandment to visit the temple 3 times a year on the 3 festivals. While little is known about the nature and scope of this phenomenon in the First Temple period and also in the early Second Temple period, from the 1st century BCE onwards, it left a considerable imprint in both Jewish and non-Jewish sources. The expansion of the Temple Mount compound and the rebuilding of the temple initiated by King Herod was an enormous achievement that attracted and accommodated multitudes of pilgrims. Contemporary historical sources, such as the New Testament, the writings of the historian Josephus Flavius, the writing of the philosopher Philo of Alexandria, are especially telling, testifying that pilgrimage was practiced by many Jews in Judea and throughout the diaspora, who made their journey by land and by sea. And here, just one example of a citing from Philo of Alexandria about the multitudes of people coming from all across the ancient world to Jerusalem. Despite the difficulties caused by the long period of absence from home, the high cost of travel, and the dangers that the pilgrims endured, their numbers continuously climbed, reaching a peak in the mid-1st century CE, in the days of Jesus or shortly thereafter. For example, Josephus notes that 2,700,000 pilgrims came to Jerusalem during the Passover of the year 66 CE. Regardless of how exaggerated this number might be, it is clear that the mass pilgrimage to the late Second Temple period Jerusalem was unparalleled in the Roman Empire. The importance of the temple to the Jews of this period cannot be overestimated. Its main power lay in its singularity. There was only one temple dedicated to the one God of Israel. This exclusivity generated much devotion among Jews toward their sacred site and served as the foundation for pilgrimage. Participation in pilgrimage, even passively, allowed worshippers to engage in rituals unique to the 3 major festivals, such as the offering of the Omer during Passover or the 4 species of tabernacles. Pilgrims arriving in Jerusalem engaged in a range of religious and social activities, though sacrifices, offerings, and ritual meals were the focal points, with the slaughterings of the lambs on Passover Eve being particularly significant. Since leaving one's home was not always possible and the long journey was hard and dangerous, Jews from the diaspora may have managed to make the trip only once in their lifetime, while people living closer to Jerusalem would probably attend the temple more frequently, as we can see in the story of the Gospels. Another major expression of solidarity with the temple was the widely observed custom of contributing a silver half shekel for its upkeep. We have historical evidence for Jews all across the Roman Empire and in Babylonia sending annually their donations to the temple. Despite the rich sources on pilgrimage to the temple, little is known about its actual reality. Paradoxically, as modern historical research advances, we seem to know less about this reality. The most detailed descriptions of pilgrimage appear in rabbinic literature of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries CE, meaning after the destruction of the temple. In the past, these sources were taken at face value as reflecting historical traditions handed down from the Second Temple period. Many current scholars, however, perceive many of these traditions as literary compositions indicative of rabbinic ideology rather than authentic testimonials. These difficulties and the enormous quantity of data gathered in excavations in Jerusalem in the last 150 years highlight the potential of archaeological evidence for reconstructing various aspects of the pilgrimage to the temple. Indeed, in the past few decades, various studies have been published on different aspects of this phenomenon, and I will survey them here shortly. To date, however, no comprehensive study on this subject, nor any synthesis of the various studies on this phenomenon exists. 2 years ago, my colleague, Orit Peleg-Barkat, and myself have launched a broad study on the archaeology of pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple in the Second Temple period, sponsored by the Israel Science Foundation. Relying on developments in methodological approaches to the archaeology of pilgrimage, as well as on comparative research with other pilgrimage destinations in the ancient world, our research aims to investigate pilgrimage to Jerusalem through an archaeological study, synthesizing the results of past studies and adding new information and insights from the study of the Ophel area at the southern temple gates. Based on the unpublished results of the Hebrew University excavations conducted on the site since 1968, almost 60 years ago, and current excavations conducted by us in partnership with the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, our research aims to show how the area developed and was designed to serve the myriad of pilgrims, as well as to reconstruct the nature of their participation in various activities at the temple gates. I will start with a short survey of several phenomena in the material culture of Jerusalem and its environs that were connected by scholars with a special character of the city as a pilgrimage destination. I will survey them from the furthest point up to the temple gates in order to give you a sense of what a pilgrim in the days of Jesus would have experienced in his journey. One study identified stepped ascents carved into the bedrock along the routes leading to Jerusalem. Many of these roads cross close to natural fountains or other sources of water, while in other cases, artificial water reservoirs were cut to fulfill the needs of the people on the road. Although these ascents are most difficult to date, their distribution, as well as the fact that at the vicinity of some of them, ritual baths were found not connected to any settlement, stands as proof to their relation to the pilgrimage road to Jerusalem in the late Second Temple period. The carving of steps, even where topography did not require them, suggests these were deliberately created to enhance the pilgrim experience rather than merely facilitate travel. These steps created a ceremonial rhythm that appears to have ritualized the journey, gradually transitioning worshippers from ordinary travel to the sacred act of temple ascent. As we shall soon see, such steps continue to shape the experience of pilgrims after entering the city itself. Reaching closer to Jerusalem, people would pass by monumental burial caves with decorated facades built along the main roads leading into the city. These were built here to exhibit the power and status of the elite, the upper elite of Jerusalem, such as high priests and various officials. Once the city was at reach, the pilgrims could notice the great number of open water pools, mostly on the outskirts of the city or immediately beyond its walls. 8 out of the 10 pools known today were dated with certainty to the late Second Temple period. Such a great number of open pools has no equivalent in other cities throughout the Hellenistic and Roman world, and attests to the special measures taken by the city's administration to fulfill the needs of the thousands of pilgrims that flocked in the city during the holidays. While most of the pools served as water reservoirs, 2 of them, the Bethesda pool north of the Temple Mount and the Siloam pool at the southeastern gate of the city, served also for mass ritual bathing, as attested in both the New Testament and in the wide staircases leading down to their bottoms. Entry into the city was possible from all sides, but the topography of the city's surroundings, with the Kidron Valley to the east and the Hinnom Valley to the southwest and south, naturally drew many worshippers to the main southern gate of the city by the Siloam pool. So the city can be entered from all directions, but these deep valleys lead to this point from this side and this side to the southern city gate, and it seems this was the main point of entrance for many of the people. The exact location of the original Siloam pool, as it existed during the time of Jesus, remained a mystery until June 2004. During construction works at the southern end of the city of David, archaeologists Roni Reich and Eli Shukron identified the pool. The structure discovered was almost 70 meters long and had steps on 3 sides. That's the lower left picture. The steps are stone-lined, but underneath there is evidence of an even earlier phase that was merely plastered, probably from the days of the Hasmonean kingdom from the 1st century BCE. The second phase, with its stone paving, is dated to the first half of the 1st century CE under the Roman governors of Judea, and this is just one example of the hectic building activity in Jerusalem in the 1st century CE. To the north of the pool, a colonnaded promenade was unearthed connecting the pool to the main thoroughfare that ran along the valley. It's called the Tyropean Valley, and this street connected the Siloam pool and the southern city gate to the Temple Mount. The recent excavations have clearly dated the paving of the street to the days of the governorship of Pontius Pilate around the year 30 CE. The street is remarkably well preserved and is built of enormous stone slabs. The street itself, some 600 meters long, is 7.5 meters wide, but the shops and other structures on both of its sides turn it into a much wider and dominant architectural feature in the city's urban layout. 2 main features mark the special character of the street. The first is the many steps along its route, making the use of the street by carriages or wagons extremely uncomfortable. The second is the lack of sidewalks on both sides of the street. These 2 characteristics are uncommon in streets in major cities of the Roman period, and here you see some comparisons from Rome, Pompeii, Herculaneum. So usually the streets have the center for carriages or wagons and then sidewalks, but we have only steps. So this attests to the fact that the street was mostly meant for pedestrians, so sidewalks were not necessary. It was suggested by the excavators that the street was used during the holidays by pilgrims ascending towards the temple. The pilgrims climbing up the step street finally reached their destination, when they arrived at the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount. Here, the character of the street changes. The steps disappear, and far more organized and monumentalized rows of shops appear on both sides. This part of the street could easily host greater number of people flocking to the temple from other parts of the city. To enable the continuation of movement in this crowded environment and to maintain the purity of the pilgrims, a brilliant solution was devised. A sidewalk that could be reached by a flight of steps was paved on top of the row of shops that were built against the southern enclosure wall of the Temple Mount. So people would be arriving from the south to here and then climb this staircase and then walk on an elevation above the rows of shops and not in the hustling street below with all the crowded traffic, and this brings them closer to their final destination. Going eastwards along the southern wall, one would reach a plaza in front of two large staircases leading up to the double and triple gate. Okay, so a big plaza before two staircases leading up to the major gates of the Temple Mount. Inside these gates, one would enter underground passageways covered with these beautiful domes, and these, by the way, are the only surviving in situ remains from the Herodian temple that can still be seen on the Temple Mount, and you would climb through this underground passageway, staircases, until you would reach on the platform, on the wide plaza of the temple itself. Pilgrims completing their journey by ascending from the southern gates through these underground staircases that dramatically emerge from within the mountain onto the vast plaza, bringing them face to face with the temple itself. While this architectural solution primarily addressed the practical challenge of navigating the significant elevation difference between the southern gates and the Temple Mount platform, it also powerfully enhanced the pilgrim experience by creating a moment of revelation as they emerged into the sacred space. As mentioned, the main ceremonies pilgrims participated in were sacrificial meals, especially of the Passover lamb. Two types of finds include remains that were connected by archaeologists with ritual meals taken by the pilgrims: animal bone assemblages and discarded cooking pots. A basic need of the pilgrims that had to be fulfilled is, of course, to provide themselves with sacrificial animals. A study of the animal bones from the early Roman period dumps on the slope of the Ophel towards the Kidron Valley, just southeast of the Temple Mount, examined the carbon and nitrogen isotopes in the bones. These dumps, nicknamed the holy garbage by the excavators, are interpreted as the deposition spot of the leftovers of sacrificial meals during the festivals that took place in the temple. The examination of the bones has shown that more than a third of the goats and sheep were brought from desert areas. This means that these were not sacrificial animals brought each by the pilgrim from his own hometown, but rather they were specifically raised and imported to the city to provide the needs of the vast numbers of pilgrims during the holidays. A unique phenomenon that is related with the sacrificial meals is the large frequency of intentional depositions of complete intact cooking vessels in several locations in the city and right outside its walls. Some of the cooking pots in these depositions were put out of use by means of perforation of small holes into their sides. So you can see these tiny holes punctured in these pottery cooking pots. And these were found in large quantities in these dumps. The depositions of these vessels suggest that the intact pots were deliberately being discarded due to purity regulations that prevented the continued use of vessels that were used for preparation of sacrificial meals. The fact that these regulations turned the cooking pots disposable required a steady flow of mass-manufactured cooking pots into the city. Indeed, a workshop that produced these vessels was excavated about 2 kilometers west of the old city of Jerusalem. Here, at least 8 units of production, including each a water cistern, a clay settling pool, a kiln, and a ritual bath, were found. These installations date from the days of Herod the Great, the 1st century BCE, up to the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70 CE, and the ritual baths in these production units were probably meant that the potters producing these cooking pots would be pure when they prepare these cooking pots for people on the road, on their way to the city, so they can buy pure cooking pots for these festivals. Another interesting phenomenon connected to pottery is this study by David Adan-Beyovich and his colleagues of these oil lamps. These are the most common oil lamps in early Roman period Judea. They're called Herodian oil lamps. And a chemical analysis of these oil lamps has shown that in northern Israel, let's say about 100 miles from Jerusalem, in Jewish towns, these oil lamps were mainly made from clays from Jerusalem, meaning these oil lamps were imported from Jerusalem, while in non-Jewish towns, they were mostly locally made in the different towns. And the most plausible interpretation is that these oil lamps were some sort of souvenirs brought back by pilgrims when they made their way back home. Delving now into the Ophel itself. The area in front of the 2 major gates leading into the temple compound from the south is known from the Bible as the Ophel. This is one of the most important archaeological sites of the Second Temple period, with substantial architectural remains and rich assemblages of finds. Thousands of pilgrims ascended to the temple through this area each year, and therefore this is the best location for studying the reality of Jerusalem as a temple city and as one of the major pilgrimage destinations of the ancient world. Excavations at the Ophel have a long history going back to the 19th century. One of the largest excavations ever carried out in Israel was conducted here between 1968 and 1978 by Benjamin Mazar, uncovering about 30 dunams. That's something like 8-9 acres. A huge excavation. Of special significance and splendor are the remains from the Second Temple period, mainly the gigantic walls of the Herodian temple compound itself and staircases and alleys around that lead up to it. During most of the First and Second Temple periods, Jerusalem was situated on the southeastern hill, the city of David. The Ophel is located on a ridge connecting the city to the south and the Temple Mount on the north, meaning it was a major route leading up from the city to the temple. During the late Second Temple period, however, Jerusalem expanded significantly to the north and west, and most of its population did not reside anymore south of the Temple Mount. So if this is the original biblical city, so in the late Second Temple period, it's a huge city, and most of the people are living up here and not to the south of the temple. Nevertheless, there are good reasons to believe that the southern gates were still considered the main entrances, and that most of the visitors to the temple reached it through the Ophel. First, the huge investment in the construction of the step street from the southern gate, which we just saw, implies a processional way leading from the south towards the temple. Second, the remains adjacent to the temple compound from the south point to an architectural design of this area that is specifically meant to serve large crowds of visitors. The two immense staircases that climb up to the south to the double and triple gate, the eastern one 15 meters wide, the western one 60 meters wide. These all point to the need to handle here heavy pedestrian traffic, apparently a major gate into the temple. Also in the area of the Ophel, other evidence are dozens and dozens of public ritual baths that dot the entire area, and these huge, colossal water reservoirs that were apparently prepared for the pilgrims climbing up to the temple. All these point to big investment in infrastructure for large crowds of people arriving to the temple from the Ophel. Finally, the symbolic and ceremonial aspect of climbing up to the temple was significant to Judaism, as it was and still is in many cultures. Indeed, the Hebrew term used in the ancient sources for pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple is aliyah laregel, literally climbing up to the festival. So in Jerusalem, this can be done only from the south, not from any other direction where you actually go down to the temple. So this emphasizes the importance of the southern approach. Reaching the Temple Mount from the south in the Second Temple period may have also preserved a sense of ancestral way of the biblical pilgrimage, which was from the city of David in the south. Zooming into the Ophel excavations, unfortunately, only a few of the remains of the Second Temple period revealed by Benjamin Mazar were published to date. Roni Reich documented the numerous ritual baths in this area, and Orit Peleg Barkat published the decorated architectural fragments that were found here. A volume on the Robinson Arch on the corner, the left corner, is in preparation. This was prepared by Eilat Mazar before she passed, and hopefully it will appear shortly. Except for the remains abutting the Temple Mount walls, we currently know very little about the plan of this area during the Second Temple period. One of our objects, therefore, is to process relevant materials from Mazar's excavations and to add new information based on our own dig. This is all meant to study the planning of the Ophel area and how it developed through the generations. Narrowing the focus on the eastern part of the Ophel, Benjamin and Mazar's excavations here revealed a Byzantine neighborhood that covered the entire area. This was published by Eilat Mazar about 15 years ago. It comprised of crowded domestic structures built on terraces. Although the natural slope of the hill here climbs from southeast to northwest, the gigantic southern wall of the Herodian Temple Mount clearly dictated the orientation of the neighborhood to the cardinal directions. So the slope actually goes this way, but the houses were built this way in accordance to this huge wall of the temple compound. The neighborhood developed in the early Byzantine period and flourished in the 5th and 6th centuries CE. In most places here, Mazar's excavations did not descend below the Byzantine floor levels, and we know very little about the earlier history of this area. Moving to the renewed excavations that started 3 years ago, Area F is a large Byzantine period structure identified by Eilat Mazar as a monastery. Benjamin Mazar suggested that its foundational remains were Herodian, and based on a fragment of an inscription found nearby mentioning perhaps the elders, He hypothesized this may have been a court that was located right near the temple gates. So we opened this area to test this hypothesis. Is the monastery indeed incorporating Herodian remains? And we probed on both sides of the eastern wall. These proved that the walls were not from the Herodian period, but much later. Still, other parts of the structure may incorporate earlier remains, and we hope to go back to this area in future seasons. Area E is located at the easternmost edge of the Ophel, below the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount. A large open area without Byzantine remains existed here and showed great potential. Immediately beneath the surface were floors and walls of structures of the Second Temple period. The biggest surprise was the discovery of several walls in the corner of this area that most likely predate the Herodian period, including lots of Iron Age pottery. So it's very tempting, and we hope in future seasons to open more of this area, maybe reaching Iron Age remains. Moving to the main area of excavations, during conservation works carried out after Benjamin Mazar's excavations, a large stepped pool was uncovered by Meir Bendov about 50 meters south of the Triple Gate. Bendov never published the discovery or anything related to it. Plans of this pool were published by Roni Reich and later by Eilat Mazar, and both assumed the pool should be dated to the Second Temple period. Two similar pools are known from elsewhere in Jerusalem and indeed date to the Second Temple period. Over a decade ago, Eilat started excavating near the pool and dismantled the eastern edge of a Byzantine house adjacent to the pool from the northwest. Beneath the Byzantine remains, a beautiful facade was discovered in which two large and adjacent thresholds were fixed. So this is the Byzantine wall, and you see peeking here behind an ashlar structure which was buried beneath the Byzantine house. Our renewed excavations, the discovery was published in the second volume of the Ophel Excavations by Eilat Mazar, where she suggested that this building should be dated to the Herodian period on the basis of finds near the openings. Our renewed excavations aim to examine the preservation of this monumental structure and to shed light on its nature and purpose. In order to reach the Herodian layer, we are excavating the large overlaying Byzantine domestic structure and documenting its phases of construction. This provides an opportunity to examine the development of the Byzantine neighborhood that was built here in the Byzantine period. By the way, many fragments of liturgical furniture found in the fills beneath the uppermost floor of the Byzantine house suggest a church stood somewhere in the near vicinity of this building. Only part of the underlying Herodian structure was uncovered thus far, under the eastern part of the Byzantine house. A 3-meter wide porch, paved with neat ashlars, was exposed in front of the structure, connecting it to the large stepped pool. Inside the structure were discovered 2 rooms with staircases descending inwards, and between them a wall with a water channel on top, perhaps meant to feed the large pool. To the north, the upper part of a vault was revealed. This means that the room below it has survived to its entire height, and we plan to expose it in the coming season. The southern room has plastered stairs and seems to have been used as a ritual bath. The architecture of the northern room is outstanding, although it is partially buried under Byzantine walls. A large threshold for a double-winged door leads to a staircase built of ashlars. On the stairs of both rooms, a massive destruction layer was excavated containing ashlars, numerous pottery vessels, stone vessels, and dozens of coins, the latest of which are coins from the year 4 of the first Jewish revolt against Rome, the year 70 CE. This is the year of the destruction of Jerusalem. Incorporated in secondary use in a Byzantine wall above this room was a fragment of a beautifully carved Herodian soffit. It joins a large assemblage of decorated ceilings from the Herodian Temple Mount found by Mazar at the foot of the southern wall of the temple enclosure, but we cannot rule out that it may have decorated our monumental building itself. Not least interesting are the subterranean discoveries. A complicated net of plastered tunnels, clearly meant to hold water and covered with large flagstones, capstones, begins under the monumental building and connects to the drainage of the large stepped pool. Part of the system clearly predates the monumental structure built above, such as a vaulted reservoir that was canceled when a massive pier supporting the superstructure was built inside. So this is a water reservoir, and it was canceled when this pier was built. Other parts were built with a superstructure, such as this beautiful arch that was fixed here to enable continuous walk through the tunnel system. Most important, the drainage system, about 3 meters high, cuts through earlier structures from the Second Temple period that were canceled when the pool and the monumental building were built. These include a large public ritual bath. You can see it's peeking out here. And a lavish structure built of ashlars. It can be seen down here. We do not have a fixed date for these earlier structures yet. They may be from the Hasmonean period or the early Herodian period. In any case, their discovery has significant implications for our understanding of the development of the Ophel as a public area in the late Second Temple period. Indeed, one of the most important questions we are dealing with is, when did large-scale pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple begin? In the First Temple period and in the early Second Temple period, pilgrimage seems to be on a small scale, apparently only from the close vicinity to Jerusalem. The earliest sources that tell us about mass pilgrimage are from the days of King Herod in the 1st century BCE, but they already presented as a wide phenomenon, and it's clear it developed earlier. One of our projects is cataloging and studying thousands of coins that were discovered in Benjamin Mazar's excavations and were never published, and we're doing this with Dr. Donald Ariel and Yoav Farhi, two numismatists, and we're cataloging over 6,000 coins. Together with those from our excavations, and this is just an example of what this is from 1971, a card of a coin from Ephesus, a very interesting coin from the Hellenistic period, but sorting through hundreds and hundreds of these documents. So analyzing the coins that are from the Second Temple period in this huge assemblage, together with the coins from our excavations, we have over 3,000 coins that are specifically from the Second Temple period. And analyzing them, even without delving into the question where exactly they were found, they can give us a sense of the amount of traffic in different periods near the temple gates. How many people were wandering around here? So I'll show this just briefly. We don't have even a single coin from the Persian period, the 5th century BCE, the 5th, the 4th. From the 3rd century BCE, we have only 23 coins, very few. There's a rise in the 2nd century BCE under the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus and so on, and then a dramatic jump in the Hasmonean period with over 400 coins, meaning that traffic to the temple in the 2nd century, 1st century BCE was getting much more intensive, and we can start sensing many more people coming to the city. And you can see the continuation in the early Roman period, the end of the 1st century BCE, beginning of the 1st century BCE, and the dramatic jump in the number of coins from the 1st century CE, with most substantial. All these red coins are coins of the Jewish revolt, of the very few last years of the temple. To these chronological indications, we may add a large water reservoir excavated by Eilat Mazar in 2018, which was clearly of public nature, with a capacity of about 300 cubic meters. It's a very large reservoir. The finds are now prepared by Eilat Mazar for publication, but initial observations seems to indicate it was used already in the Hasmonean period. If this will prove to be true, it is evidence for infrastructure built to serve pilgrims already in the Hasmonean period. Moving to the overall picture, the rich finds from the excavations, including hundreds of identifiable pottery vessels, dozens of stone vessels and oil lamps, and hundreds of ancient coins, point to two distinct layers in the area we're excavating. One from the Byzantine period on top with a few phases, and the second from the lower one from the Second Temple period, which also has at least two phases, if not more. The Herodian structure was built on a southeast-northwest axis, while the Byzantine structure is built on an east-west axis, and you can see here clearly the different axes. This building goes this way, and the Byzantine period building goes that way. What can we say now about the nature and history of the Herodian structure? Its monumental architecture and large entranceways clearly indicate it was a public building. The architectural plan shows that the structure, the porch, and the large stepped pool were all built as one integral complex. They are built on the same axis with a sophisticated subterranean water system connecting them, apparently filling the pool from the top and draining the pool from the bottom. Furthermore, the plan of the staircase leading into the structure on the one hand, and the staircase leading into the stepped pool on the other, seem to mirror each other, with sets of stairs intervened by landings, again pointing to an integral plan. The current length of the exposed part of this complex is about 20 meters, and it clearly continues to the west. This is substantial. The prime location of this complex, near the foot of the staircase climbing up to the triple gate, indicates it was probably of major significance. But what was its purpose? I'm afraid that before we uncovered the rest of the building, we cannot say for sure. Based on what we have uncovered so far, we may suggest it was a complex devoted to ritual purity. The large stepped pool was most likely used as a ritual bath of some sort, and also the southern room in our complex was probably a ritual bath. We're not sure yet when this monumental structure was built. It was clearly destroyed with the entire city in the year 70. We also do not know yet how this complex was integrated into the urban plan of the Ophel, and how exactly was it accessed. These questions will have to wait until we continue to excavate in further season with a wider exposure of Second Temple period layer in order to receive answers. Managing an excavation is comparable to conducting an orchestra. The intensive collaboration with staff members, volunteers, state authorities, contractors, conservators, specialists, etc., makes this mission complicated and exhausting. We are fortunate to have wonderful team members and volunteers. who make this into a fascinating and enjoyable experience, each contributing his or her part to bring this collaborative mission to completion. We wish to thank you all, and we're looking forward to the future seasons together at the Ophel. Thank you. Now, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Mine was related to the sheep and goats, I guess, that are coming from afar. So you said that they were raised outside of Jerusalem, and so is that implying that people would come to Jerusalem and purchase an animal for the sacrifice rather than bringing it from home? And is there a certain percentage that were raised in the Galilee region, maybe, that were found in that study?
Mm-hmm. So this isotopic study enables to show on what kind of land were these animals grown, where they grazed, and it clearly showed that over a third of them were brought from desert areas. We know the desert areas near Jerusalem and further from Jerusalem, these are not populated areas, maybe on the fringes, but these are definitely not sheep and goats brought with pilgrims that live in desert areas, but rather they were grown there and brought by merchants in order to be sold in Jerusalem. We don't have evidence, we don't have any clear evidence of sheep or goats brought from the Galilee. I'm not sure if that study could actually pinpoint Galilee as a destination where these were grown. It's very complicated to try and identify based on the isotopes where exactly. It's mainly the study of the teeth, what kind of grass they were grazing on, and so on. I don't know of any example from Galilee.
Hello, Professor Leibner. So we talked about the massive pilgrimage at about the time of Josephus. I think he mentioned the figure over 2 million. So when you have 2 million people coming in for a pilgrimage, where were they housed? And were they outside of the city, or were they largely going inside?
Okay, so thanks for the great question. First of all, we believe this number is highly exaggerated. And he had actually no real weight of counting so many people, but it's pretty obvious that so many people could not be crowded in Jerusalem, but we're probably talking in numbers of tens of thousands, maybe a few hundred of thousands, depends on which scholar you ask. It's a big question where people were lodging. So, we have in the New Testament one evidence of someone outside the city, in a village outside the city, where he's lodging in someone's house. Actually, we have only two historical clear sources. One is Josephus. In bypassing, he's talking about some sort of a riot during one of the pilgrims, and he says that in the tent camp out of the city where pilgrims were staying, so the Roman army was chasing them to that direction. So we learn that north of the city, people were probably encamping in tents. We believe this was probably a wide phenomenon, like you could see, let's say in Mecca, 60 or 80 years ago, camp tents outside the city walls. That's probably many of the pilgrims, some of them renting places inside the city. Another interesting evidence we have is archaeological evidence. There's a fascinating inscription that was found in the city of David over 100 years ago in Greek. It's called the Theodotus inscription. He's the one who put it up. Theodotus, son of Vetenus, built the synagogue and the hostel for people from afar. I don't remember exactly the wording, but this is understood by most scholars as some sort of a hostel or an inn built for pilgrims coming from far. He also mentions their water reservoirs and other structures built in this complex, but we must admit our knowledge is very scant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Leibner, for visiting us today. You probably touched on this just with the last question there, but any thoughts that you have on, I mean, Josephus had the estimate, which you say is exaggerated, for 67. Any thoughts or just even detail that you would have going back to Jesus' ministry, when, like, how many or any unique events that surrounded the pilgrimage to Jerusalem at that time, like the late 20s or 30s CE?
In terms of numbers of
numbers, yeah, or anything that you've gotten just from studying the Gospels regarding the pilgrimage.
So I think one important thing that the archaeology can tell us is on the actual days of Jesus is the huge investment in building infrastructure for pilgrimages in the days of Pontius Pilate. So I mentioned here just the street. So Pontius Pilate is known to all of us from the Gospels and also from Josephus, and he's usually presented in very dark colors. But at least in terms of what can we say about Jerusalem in his period, so that's flourishing. It's really, when you see Jerusalem of the late Second Temple period that is exposed today, you basically see the city of Pontius Pilate or the governors right after him or before him. And this gives us a very different look at, well, we don't know actually if he was the one who was in charge. Maybe it was just the temple administration building all this infrastructure, but he definitely had to improve it, to approve it as a governor, because it's a huge investment of funds. Josephus tells us just of one instance where he himself is involved. He confiscates money of the temple treasury to build an aqueduct to Jerusalem. And the people are rioting, and how does he dare take money from the temple treasury? But if we see this maybe as a step for the city is growing, many more pilgrims are arriving, and you have to facilitate them with water so we can understand, we get a totally different picture of this figure and his activities. So I think that's one, as an archaeologist, what I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Leibner. When did your passion for archaeology first begin, and how are you still so passionate about it today?
Oh, we're getting personal. Okay. Yeah. So actually, I grew up in a house. My father was a tour guide, like Brent and Chris do today with groups coming to Jerusalem. So he was like a professional tour guide. And as a very young kid, instead of going to summer camp, I would just go with my dad on a tour bus or on his in his van across the country from, I can't even remember from what age. So that's, I think, my first step or my first passion to this, and it was always excited me. And later, after we got married, we moved to live up north in the Galilee, in the Golan Heights, and I studied there, and I really got fascinated into the whole surrounding. There are lots of archaeological sites there, and that's where I really got into professional archaeology. I must admit, it's a very special way of making living. You know, it's first of all, it's very exciting. Whoever participate here, just finding ancient stuff like buried for 2,000 years is just so exciting, and you get a chance as an adult to play in the dirt, to be on your knees, to find coins, and to get paid for this. So it's really that's what I think keeps the passion. Thanks for this personal question.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Leibner. I had a question about the staircases, because on the photos we saw that there was the square on the south side of the temple compound, and then there was also this staircase on the southwestern side.
Right.
What was the main entrance towards the temple compound, and was it maybe that they used the south entrance more to get into the compound and then the southwestern to leave, or was it both to get into the temple compound?
Okay, I don't know, it seems it's locked. I would like to go back. Is there any way I can go back with the presentation? No. In any case, we have at least 4 gates coming from the west. 2 of them are with staircases climbing up. There's the Robinson Arch, but that specifically goes into the Royal Basilica. That's a huge structure that Herod the Great built on the southern part of the Temple Mount. It seems that the staircase is meant specifically to that area and not probably for the masses coming into the temple. A second one to the north of that is the Wilson Arch coming on a long bridge coming from the upper city, crossing the valley and going into the Temple Mount from the west. This was probably used mainly by locals coming from the upper city that connects the residents of the high society living in the upper city of Jerusalem, and actually the palace of Herod, and then the Roman governors, which is located on the upper hill. So that's probably, but definitely also pilgrims could have used that entrance. So the 2 other smaller gates on the lower level, where you go up from the street level, also through underground chambers till you get up to the plaza. But those seem to be all smaller and probably more for locals, where the mass traffic seems to have come from the south, just based on the magnitude of the infrastructure leading from the south.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Leibner. I had a question about the vessels that were found that had, cooking pots for sacrificial meals. You mentioned that they needed to be pure vessels. If a vessel was made and it was deemed impure, number one, what kind of defect maybe rendered a vessel impure, and if so, was it repurposed for something else?
So, according to Jewish law, or what we call halachic law, these are actually later compositions. Some of them date back to the temple period. Some of them may be later, but according to them, actually this is a biblical verse in the book of Numbers, that if a pottery vessel becomes impure, there's no way to purify it. You have to break it. Ve'oto tishboro, you have to smash it. That's the literary reason. So there's no way to use it again, and people who are concerned with ritual purity, if their vessel became impure, they will just throw it out. They will not use it again. It seems that these deliberate discarding of these huge piles of vessels was not that they became impure, they just were used for sacrificial meals, and people did not want them to be used again for lesser important or daily mundane use. So they were used for sacrifices, so they become like this high status. And this we have evidence again in rabbinic literature, that once you use them for that, you cannot lower their degree to a daily use. That's probably the interpretation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Leibner. You had talked about the large amounts of coins found in the Ophel area, and I guess my question is, how did they get there? And if it was a place for purity, were they paying, or why was there so many coins concentrated in that area?
So, well, obviously, these are coins that people lost. Yeah, they were in their pockets, they lost them. The many coins from the destruction layer from the last years were probably during the dramatic years of the revolt. People were also living there. Although this is a public area, people were living there during the revolt, hiding there. We have evidence of people hiding in this area. But most of them were just people that came to the temple. And what we understand of this whole area surrounding the Temple Mount, this very intensive commerce. People coming, they need to buy their sacrificial animal. They need to buy maybe a cooking pot. They need to buy they have to pay their half shekel. How do they pay it? So we know, from the Gospels of money changers sitting on the Temple Mount or in the entrances to the Temple Mount, money changers changing money for people to the official coin. So all these are transactions done with coins. So that's the reason. The concentration is very, very large. That's really outstanding. This is one of the largest assemblages of coins. It's not one hoard. It's found all across. That was found to date in Israel. Like most excavations, you have a few dozens of coins, a few hundreds, but here we have thousands and thousands. So it really points to this public nature of this area.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Professor. My question also regards those coins. It's a lot of them, and you showed us a card of one that came from Ephesus,
Right.
Which is pretty amazing. It seems like it can give us some insight into the diaspora, like where did all of these people go? Where were they coming from to Jerusalem? Can you share with us maybe some of the faraway places we have coins from that were found there in Jerusalem?
Okay, so this is work under progress. We were hoping that when we'll get into this, we'll find lots of coins just like this, but now that we're in the final stage of cataloging, I must say we have very few coins that come from far away. So people definitely came from the diaspora. We have their evidence in historical sources, but they were using mainly local currency. So coinage from either Judea or from regions near Judea, like the Phoenician cities along the coast. Most popular are Tyre. Tyre on the Phoenician coast is a major city, and actually the half shekel is paid with Tyrian shekels because that's considered the most reliable currency in the area. So very few coins coming from afar. What we can say generally about the material culture in the Ophel, in the late Second Temple period, it is clearly local. We have almost no imports coming from afar, which we can easily identify. So it seems that people coming from afar, they even did not bring their vessels from Galilee. They were coming and buying in the markets of Jerusalem their pots, their jars, their bowls, whatever they were using. It's mainly locally made. So I'm afraid we don't have a lot of evidence of archaeological evidence, meaning of where people were coming from.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leibner. My question relates to what motivated people for pilgrimage. You mentioned that some people, not everyone, was able to go. But if I remember correctly, Jeroboam I created 2 calves that people would not go. Was it more the temple structure that drew people, or is it a sign of religious devotion that the numbers increased at one point?
So it may be an answer that combines all these different aspects. So some people maybe could not make it physically. Others could not make it financially. It's a big expense. Let's say if you're coming from Alexandria, like Philo, you have to pay for a ship. You have to leave house for a month, maybe a month and a half, not working. It's a huge expense, like anyone traveling for a long period knows. It's so a financial burden would be another issue. Family issues, health issues, different issues. We do know from the sources, especially Josephus, that there were large, I would say, delegations, like communities coming. He talks especially from Babylonia. That's about 3 weeks of a journey, each direction. That's a very long, and he talks about the thousands. So again, even if he's exaggerating, but since we think that in Babylonia there were hundreds of thousands of Jews, so obviously even if there were a few thousands that came in the days of Jesus, that's just a small percentage of the entire Jewish Babylonian community. So I believe different reasons were the ones that prevented, but it may be also some sort of a devotion issue, meaning maybe many people just thought that it's enough to send their annual contribution, and leaving the house for a month and a half was just too much for them. But we don't know for sure, I'm afraid.
Well, Professor Leibner, I think that's about it for the questions. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for sharing your excitement for Jerusalem history, Jerusalem archaeology with us here today. And I think you'll be around if people have some more personal questions maybe or something like that to ask you as well. So thank you very much, Professor Leibner.
Thank you.